If you agree that adults can decide to transition, then why would the physician be criminal? Don't adults have that right if they want to transition?
JP got mad that a real oppressed group is getting more attention than his white male victimhood mentality. We can share in the rights, we can share in the spoils. It's not some limited resource that will dry up if we don't keep it to ourselves. You're a rich white boomer who's famous for room temperature hot takes like clean up your room. You're one of the most privileged people in society. So privileged, in fact, that a drug addiction is the worst thing you've ever gone through. Being told to shut up by minorities with real problems is the most oppressions you've ever felt. So of course you can't understand why it's an issue, and you're just going on the offense because you're a big baby who's mad that they put your privileged white boy ass in its place. Go eat a $300 steak and meditate on a mountaintop you own and stop getting in the way of society.
Not everything legal isn't criminal.
You've never gone after massive corporations for not paying taxes. You've never discussed how a significant amount of Walmart employees subsist off the government handouts because Walmart doesn't want to pay them a living wage. You've never talked about how a gun owner is legally allowed to sell a semi-automatic firearm to a psychotic person. You haven't gone after lobbyists for manipulating the laws. You haven't gone after the government for handing out billions of dollars to corporations and don't lift a finger for the suffering citizens. I say all this to point out you clearly don't have an issue with legal evil, so using it as your argument for a trans adult altering their body of their own volition seems really disingenuous, and you're clearly not as smart as you'd like to think you are, doctor.
See, I would have left Ellen Page alone if she hadn't been parading her new abs in a fashion magazine.
JP probably doesn't know what the term dead naming is, so I'm going to give an overview for you watching this. Dead naming is when you intentionally say somebody's pre-transition name with the intent of insulting them, much like people refusing to use person's new terminology just to piss them off and throw freedom of speech in their face. Which, like you said before, not everything legal isn't criminal, yet somebody intentionally belittling another person is fine with you, but letting an individual get surgery that doesn't hurt anybody else is supposedly heinous? I hope you're against breast implants, because then at least your logic tracks, but if it's exclusively trans people's whose bodies you don't want altered, you're a great representation of everything wrong with society.
How many kids do you think she can convince to convert?
There is no convincing to convert. We all know the weird kids in elementary and high school grew up to be just as, if not more weird. The idea that because kids are stupid, the inherent things they feel about themselves are all wrong. That's not true. Whenever I hear a coming out story, oftentimes it's followed with a parent or friends being like, you know, I kind of always knew, we just weren't saying anything. And if it's not, it's because the parent refuses to accept gay people, or in your case, trans people. I'm not going to apologize for your ignorance because you've been such a Twitter celebrity that you really should understand trans people by now. But as we've seen on the Joe Rogan podcast, you are willfully ignorant to get your way, even when Joe calls you out on your bullshit. Joe Rogan is just too much of an apologist to shun you for the transphobe you are. So, let me put it like this. Trans kids aren't quote-unquote converted like religious folks think just because that's the framework religion exists in. Seeing stuff like Elliot Page just gives the kids the confidence to open up about their feelings and discuss them more thoroughly rather than bottling them down and exploding into a mess later on in life. Opening up and having these discussions with their parents is helpful. If their parents are retarded, then the kids will understand and know they can't share their feelings with them. But if they have loving and compassionate parents, they'll work together to understand each other, and maybe the child won't end up transitioning or identifying the other way, which is very similar with what happened to me, and overall will be a great learning experience for everyone in that scenario. So there is no converting kids to trans.
With the trans community, it's very similar to the gay community, where back when that first became a big issue, people thought, oh, if we talk about it, if it's in magazines or whatever, we're promoting kids to go down that path. But really what happened is people are who they are. And if they're gay, they just decided to be like, yeah, I'm gay. And
I'm not sure if JP was saying no as in, no, I disagree with that's the reality of things, or he's saying no like, no, I get, you can stop explaining it to me now. I'm just going to give him the benefit of the doubt because JP is not as critical of gay people as he is on trans people, so it wouldn't track to call him an idiot that he disagrees with the nature of things just to paint him in a more negative light than he already has. So, benefit of the doubt, he understands gay people, but he may prove me wrong later in this video.
They were just more open and honest with themselves. So I don't think you're promoting people to do that.
No,
You're
that's
just
not
saying,
what happened.
if you
You're
are that, it's
completely
okay.
wrong.
Okay, well,
You're utterly
I'm
wrong.
listening.
Okay, I guess I was wrong to give him the benefit of the doubt. JP doesn't understand gay people, but he's going to tell Kyle exactly why reality is not what it is, or so I hope he will explain, but you know, JP doesn't get to a single point about anything without a story about Pinocchio or a dragon, and as Einstein says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough, which can be used as an argument that JP actually understands extremely little about psychological things he talks about on a daily basis, in which case he probably just got the following he did over his flowery language.
One of the reasons that I opposed Bill C-16 in Canada to begin with, this pronoun compelled speech bill, was because I knew perfectly well what was going to happen when we introduced confusion about gender identity into the public sphere.
The same exact thing as when the idea of being gay was introduced. Your biology says you should be attracted to a specific thing, but some people aren't coded that way. Then everybody who is coded, the majority, lost their goddamn minds over a few people being different. And now the same exact thing is happening with trans people. A few people are born coded differently and you stupid geezers are losing your minds over it. Maybe if you at least tried to understand it, maybe you wouldn't take such an issue. Regardless, JP is lagging behind society, and he will be remembered as somebody who stood on the front lines fighting against transgender people being allowed to remove their breast, which they should be allowed to have it because it's not happening at anybody else's expense. Basically, idiots like himself are the only people confused, and that's why he opposed the bill in Canada.
Now, the argument was that if we left people with gender dysphoria alone to make their own way and stop torturing them.
People used to think being gay was a mental health disorder. Then later people realized it's just a natural phenomenon. People with mental disabilities used to be ostracized from society, but now they've been validated and understood. But I don't think the idea that trans people are misunderstood has crossed his mind because he's so persistent that they're evil, hence torturing.
We would decrease the mental health load on those individuals.
This isn't a parody, he's literally not joking. He's evaluating being trans the same exact way people used to evaluate being gay. He's so close-minded it's laughable. This guy deserved to fall off.
And my analysis as a clinician was that
the field of psychology has only existed for a super short time in society, and it's still developing. If JP thinks Sigmund Freud was some psychological genius, we may be able to certify that JP is in fact retarded, because nobody believes in shit like pedis envy or women daydreaming about their husbands beating the shit out of them. Those are things I learned about Sigmund Freud in college, and he was basically the foundation of psychology, as we learned anyway. JP is teaching insanely outdated material from the 80s, which, as you know, is basically when gay people were willingly recognized in the public eye, and not in a good way because incessant propaganda was spewed against them, much like is happening now with trans people. The 80s are happening all over again. It's also pretty authoritarian to connote that just because you're slightly more educated on a specific thing, therefore your position is automatically correct, as Jordan Peterson is pointing to his clinical days. Just like I'm a professional video editor, but I've discussed with people who don't video edit, and they have some ideas that literally blow my mind sometimes when I discuss video editing with them.
For every one person of that sort that we hypothetically saved, we doom 1,000 more as a consequence of confusion and social contagion.
Let's focus on that. Jordan Peterson called trans people a contagion on society. He's also saying for each validated trans person in the world, we're essentially killing 1,000 other kids who are too confused. Kids are never confused about their feelings. In rare cases, they don't understand it because they don't know any better. They seek out information to understand. Then if they find out, then they do understand. JP would have it seem that every kid who wonders about their gender identity commits to being trans, when the fact is there are many, many more of us who don't get confused, then realize we're not, and we don't make a big stink about it in public because we dealt with it privately. I know I'm a dude, but I would probably have been considered one of the 1,000 doomed, according to Jordan Peterson. I've had other friends who've been wishy-washy with they're like, nah, my sex and gender are intertwined, and to pretend that their lives have been destroyed by a small number of trans people whose lives don't affect ours is Bologna. I'm not going to cover the whole video, otherwise I'd spend all day writing the script, and he cherry picks a few examples to support his argument that anybody with half a brain cell can understand he's using as an excuse for his failing argument. He even demands that everybody on the left start having kids because of declining birth rates and quotes a hypothetical percentage point of births without realizing the irony. He also says that 1 in 5 people are going to be trans in the future, which I'll play that clip in a second, but there are fewer trans people on the planet than gay people, and literally like 5% of the population or some other really small number are gay. And this is while it's publicly accepted to be gay.
What percentage of the population do you think is going to end up being trans at the end of this? Do you think like one day it's going to be like 70% of the country is trans?
Well, we know already that about 1 in 5 adolescents now identifies, to use that hated word, identifies as part of the hypothetical LGBTQ plus community. So it's 1 in 5.
I love it when famous people don't have critical thinking skills. He also just doesn't share where this 1 in 5 people identify with the community comes from. There's also an exorbitant amount of evidence that teenagers are experimenting in high school to figure out exactly where they stand, so that number will surely decrease as time goes on, as some people who like shows like She-Ra, Steven Universe, and the Owl House realize they're actually straight and can just appreciate other people for the way they are.
You should think again. You're on the wrong side of this, and not in a trivial way.
I would appreciate if you don't ascribe beliefs to me that I don't have. Remember, my original question.
You could see Kyle smiling in that clip. I'm pretty sure he was about to laugh at the sheer stupidity shown by this former college professor. To be fair, Kyle isn't defending the community or trying to contradict JP yet, but he does give Jordan the grace to give his question another try so he can at least attempt to redeem himself.
You said earlier in this question
that Elliot Page is an adult, and so do you think that he has the right to transition?
Kyle based properly identifying Page. Wonder if JP thinks he's talking about somebody totally different or not, because the idea of somebody going by a different name seems to trip up JP every time he talks about it. JP then goes on to strawman Elliot's position.
I just have to say, Jordan, I think it's a little bit of a moral panic. I just don't see some sort of, frenzy of people wanting to become trans.
First of all, that's a hell of a way to put it.
Why
don't you take a look at the increases in surgical interventions and see what you think? I mean, how many do you think is too many?
Again,
if we're talking about
I'll answer your question.
Kyle legit covering his half smile from the camera and JP raising his voice at Kyle for not agreeing with him. JP really is an excellent representation of everything wrong with the right. Now, if you're on the right and don't want to be a bigot, just don't quote misleading statistics, don't high road other people, and be okay with folks disagreeing with you. I myself agree to disagree with a lot of people about gun control laws because I understand where they're coming from. People on the right hate the left a lot more than vice versa, which is why Kyle is being so patient with JP's childlike ignorance.
What used to be suppressed?
The entire LGBTQ community. I mean, it was very recently we even got gay marriage in the United States.
First of all, they're not a community.
Literally, the entire community disagrees with the statement. Also, there are a few flaws in the community that make some people distance themselves from it. I helped make a video on that very topic, so check it out, but those reasons don't disprove that it is a community. But for argument's sake, let's have the straight white geezer mansplain to us why we're retards.
Well, you understand the point I'm making.
No, actually, neither I understand it nor you, and that's why we're delving into it.
Maybe you should try to understand your political opponents before judging the merits of their actions. Aside from that, this admission makes his argument fall apart because it's an admission of ignorance. Meanwhile, he's claiming Kyle doesn't understand, when in just a few small clips I've shown of him, he clearly has a much better grasp than JP.
And I'll tell you something else, that almost all the kids who are undergoing surgical intervention, the clinical literature is absolutely clear on this. 80% of kids with gender dysphoria identify as homosexual when they mature. 80%. And that means the vast majority of people who are being converted surgically are gay.
What you feel and what you're attracted to are two separate things. That's why there's hypermasculine men and also femboys.
Now, how is that an advantage to the gay community precisely?
No, see, I'm not taking a position in any way, shape, or form on the kids because I don't know the first thing about this to comment on the kids. Well, but see, that's why we're having this conversation, though, is because my original question was about the adults and what your take is on the adults. And it sounds to me like, let me ask you guys, would you ban transition surgery for adults?
Kyle has made it very clear he's here to talk about trans adults, and JP just wants to insert his dislike of gay children and not talk about the things that he's on Kyle's channel to talk about. If JP stuck to just that, I wouldn't have quite as long a video on this as I do, but he can't help to flaunt fake news in Gameageddon.
I don't know.
Really?
I love Kyle.
And
But
so,
aren't there some people that are obviously trans who were born in one body, they feel like they're in the other body, and when they're an adult, they can make the decision? And then even from just a freedom and liberty perspective, shouldn't they have that right? Even if they do it and then they regret it, shouldn't they have the right to try it?
it's a good question.